Hello, thank you for holding and calling Green Beauty Continuing Education for Clinicians. Based on the selection you had put into your phone, I understand that you are interested in enrolling in some continuing education units. Is that correct? Okay. That's right. We are running a special for 31 hours for $59. Okay. Now, would you like to learn some detailed information about the content of these courses? Yes. You'd like that option before enrolling. Okay. So what I'm going to have us do is we first begin by collecting all of your customer information. This is going to include your basic information in addition to your licensure number and certification date, etc. So I am to understand then that you would like for me to go over with you the detailed content and perhaps learning objectives of each potential course? Okay. All right. Yeah, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what those courses are. And before we get into that, let's go ahead and gather the booklet together. If you can just open it up, I'm so glad that you received your complimentary copy in the mail. And as you can see, we are showcasing some of our most popular ones this season. This includes the continuing education courses on racial trauma, ethics for counselors, alcohol use disorder, and demystifying dissociation. This is going to include dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality, including something smaller scale like the dissociation that occurs during panic or anxiety. So if you could please just follow along with me as I gather your information. In order for me to be able to reach the next screen that allows me to share with you some of the content of these courses, I do need to include some information from you. We're going to begin with your last name, please. Okay, your first name. That's right. This needs to align with what is on your license issued by the state. Okay. Your middle initial. And what is the state that has issued the license for you? Okay. And go ahead with that license number whenever you're ready. Expiration on that. Okay. Do you hold any additional license? No. Okay. Now, the type of license that you're operating under as a counselor, is it a licensed professional clinical counselor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, or a licensed clinical social worker? LMFT. Okay. And what is your address? I am going to need both the home address and the address under your business license. Okay. And the city with that, please. Zip code. Fabulous. All right, and a phone number. And by any chance, are you operating a fax machine? No. Yes, that is definitely a dying trend. So in order to receive your certificate upon completion of our course, we do obviously need this information, but I am asking you now, how would you like to receive the certificate? Would you like a PDF emailed to you, which is a certified copy? Would you like it mailed hard copy for an additional $6? That's right. So if you recall, every 2 years to renew your license, you are required to undergo a certain amount of continuing education units or continuing education hours. Each unit is based upon a certain amount of hours, and you are to keep any of these copies or certifications for proof of record in the event that you might be audited by the state or even subpoenaed if needed by the court for any other unrelated cases. Okay, great. So you would in fact like the hard copy. I understand everybody has their preference. Okay, now this is a deal that's happening until April 30th for the charge of $59. Should you decide to delay, it then does increase to $69. I would like to discuss with you the details of which courses are included in this special offer. So as you can see in your booklet, we do have racial trauma, the African American or Black experience for 5 hours total, coming out at $20. Then we have the course number 77722, Ethics for a Counselor. That's going to be 6 hours. And may I remind you that Law and Ethics for Counselors is required every renewal period for every clinician. So that's right, you may have engaged in a course that it was similar 2 years ago. And due to a new law recently passed, we are required every 2 years to take 6 units of law and ethics. That comes in at $24. Then we have alcohol and alcohol use disorders coming in at 10 hours for a total of $40, leaving us with demystifying dissociation, principles, best practices, and clinical approaches for a total of 10 hours and $40. How does that sound? Great. Now, I do have a special offer here for you that we do have some additional courses available by mail. If you are interested, I can give you some access online for a discount. Are any of these looking interesting to you, or are they relevant to any of the clients you're currently seeing? Okay. Right. Oh, incorporating musical strategies into clinical practice. That's right. Cocaine use disorder. That's coming in at $28. Right. Okay. And managing and preventing burnout. That's coming in at 4 hours for $24. Wonderful. All right, so before we pursue the final enrollment, as we do need to go through our detailed course descriptions, let me just, for our convenience now, go ahead and insert your credit card number. And what is the name as shown on the credit card? Okay. Expiration date. And the security code. Wonderful. So you would like, okay, you're not sure about some of the additional ones. I understand. No problem. So I'm just going to keep the screen open for us here, and we'll come back to it as needed. So let's take a look now. If we go back to the beginning of our booklet, where it does discuss a little bit, well, quite a lot in depth around what to expect from these courses, you'll see here that the racial trauma course is the 5-hour one. That's coming in, the course number there is 76920, and this is going to be released. This was just released over the summer. Now let me just clarify for you so that you can decide whether or not this is relevant, though this type of course is relevant to every single clinician, whether or not you see people from this racial background. This is quite important for us to understand and conceptualize as care providers. Alrighty, so the audience of this one is definitely mental and behavioral health professionals. And this is an objective of this course, is really just to provide us, mental and behavioral professionals, the knowledge and skills necessary to provide trauma-informed care. The learning objectives of this course, so meaning upon completion of this course, you should be able to define racism and its historical and current manifestations in the United States. You should be able to describe the impact of structural racism and related racial trauma. You should be able to evaluate the adverse health and mental health impacts of racial trauma on African Americans or Black individuals. And you should certainly be able to outline approaches to rebuild rapport and utilize the most appropriate interventions for this population as well. Okay, so if you take a look further into the booklet, you'll find an incredibly detailed plethora of information that talks about what you will be covering. So it's going to talk about responses to racism, trauma, and resiliency. It's going to talk about structural racism, immigration and migration, and all the other elements that affect this population disproportionately. Okay? And it even goes into the concept of the impact of sex and gender on African American health and mental health. And of course, a big piece around the rapport building and intervention planning. That's right. Okay. So it's going to also even discuss elements that are strength-based approaches. It's going to cover concepts of religion and spirituality as well. So I will let you continue to read through this as needed, but you'll find there is quite a bit of wonderful information here for you. Okay, and you'll find here on page 17 an example of some of the test questions. That's right. Upon each continuing education course, the way that you receive your certificate is to take a test. And this is a comprehensive exam that really just sets out to evaluate if you have comprehended and integrated the new content that you had learned from this course. So this is going to be an open book test, and you need at least an 80% in order to receive your certificate. So you can take a look at some of the examples to give you an idea of what the platform is like, what the foundation of this quiz is like. So obviously it's multiple choice, and it does have questions, definition questions, some exception questions, and usually some true or false as well. All right, now this is taking us to page 20, where it is talking about ethics for counselors. Now remember that you are required 6 hours of law and ethics every 2-year renewal period. This is going to be course number 77722. This was released in May of 2019. With regard to what this is covering, you're going to start pretty much back from the beginning. You're going to discuss the history of counseling in the United States. My hope for you is that your graduate program did a lot of this information already. It's very important that we understand the foundation of counseling and seek to renew and rebuild for modern times for all people. You're also going to talk about the history of ethics. So you're going to get into this concept of the Hippocratic Oath and its background. You're going to talk some philosophy of ethics. You're going to discuss and learn about modernism and postmodernism and what that means. You'll differentiate between values and morals. And you'll learn an ethical decision-making model of how to make your way through dilemmas, things called ethical dilemmas. You know those quite well. That's right. They exist for all of us, don't they? And just to remind you here, now in the sense of this particular course, it is talking about some of the ethical principles. Now, some of these are designated by the ACA Code of Ethics, and that's the American Counseling Association. Things like autonomy, beneficence, confidentiality, fidelity, things like that. It's all non-maleficence, but I'm noticing here in this course they have added their own ethical principles that exist outside of the ACA Code of Ethics. So it has all the sections here that you will be reviewing, so this is very in-depth. Okay. Let's go ahead and keep going. Yes, you're learning quite a bit just from this pamphlet alone. And when we get into the legal component, although it is also ethical, we're talking about in this course the information regarding privacy and confidentiality. This includes distance counseling, which is happening quite a bit now, informed consent, and security when you do that process of therapy. Okay, so let's keep going forward now. This is a very lengthy section. Now, do I have your consent to enroll you in the racial trauma? Yes. All right, let me just get my notepad and take that little note. Here we go. So, yes, you would like the racial trauma. And, right. Do you want the ethics for counselors? You do. Yeah. Okay, that's going to be a very extensive course. And luckily, you've got plenty of time before your renewal date to complete all of these. So let's transition over to alcohol and alcohol use disorder. Now, this is very lengthy. This is going to be a 10-hour certification course. We're looking at course number 76563. The release date of this continuing education course was June 1st, 2020. All right, now this is going to be quite lengthy. Briefly, let me just tell you a little bit about some of the learning objectives. Remember, that is upon completion of this course, you should be able to review facts about the history, costs, and prevalence of alcohol use and abuse. You should be able to define moderate drinking and take a history of alcohol use as defined by the standard drink equivalency. You should be able to identify benefits reported in the literature for moderate alcohol consumption. You should be able to distinguish between genetic and environmental risk and protective factors for developing. You're also going to be able to list complications associated with alcohol use disorder. You're going to be able to describe some clinical characteristics of alcohol use, intoxication, and withdrawal. You're going to recognize mental health problems associated with this. And of course, you'll be able to use some screening instruments to detect any alcohol use related disorder, including non-English proficient clients. Okay. So just to understand here a little bit of what's happening in this particular course is that, again, as with many things, we start at the beginning. We look at the history, we look at the founding concepts around alcohol in America, and here you'll notice that the history of alcohol really begins with the story of the Mayflower. That's right. The Pilgrims, colonizers, that's right. The Mayflower dropped anchor in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and this is where we're really talking about how they ran out of their alcohol, their beer, and what that meant and how seriously the crew took how seriously they took this issue. We know that beer has a huge influence and place in our history. What's interesting and sets this course apart from others is that it does talk about Dr. Benjamin Rush. Now, he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He's also known as the father of the American psychiatry area. So this is really when I'm talking back in the 1700s, when he started to identify problems caused by alcohol, and he called for what they used, the term temperance. He started to describe addiction and identified alcohol as an addictive substance. Now, this goes into length about the history and further into the 19th century and what came with prohibition and so forth. What we find quite interesting about this particular course is that it provides a lot of updated research, okay? So this course is really going to cover a lot of current statistics based upon age and alcohol use as current as 2019. So that's right. These are going to be the most up-to-date current statistics regarding alcohol use. Now go ahead and take a look at page 77 with me. Notice here, and this is just an example of some of what you're going to be shown in the course. This is talking about binge drinking, so binge and heavy alcohol use. It's taking a look at different ages. We have 12 or older, 12 to 17, 18 to 25, 26 or older. I want you to notice here the black bars. This is to indicate binge alcohol use. So that means usually 2 or 3 or more drinks in one setting. Noticing here for the age 18 to 25, we've got the highest percentage here of that age demographic engaging in binge drinking. And of course, we can identify this as college age, transitional age, a very big time in life, transitioning out of high school, transitioning perhaps out of the home or not. So we've got lots of adjustment periods happening for a variety of reasons in this demographic. But looking now below, this is talking about and differentiating between binge drinking and specific abuse and dependence. They are very different. And you'll notice here we've just got some further inclinations here around what the percentages are provided in this figure. Now, before we transition over, we're just noticing here that it really talks about the differences between sexes and alcohol consumption. And it also talks about problems that occur as a result of intoxication. So about 40% of people who drink have experienced an alcohol-related problem. Between 3% and 8% of women and 10% to 15% of men, usually that amount of people, between 3 and 8% of women, will develop alcohol use disorder at some point in their life, and that's 10 to 15% of men. Okay, now the earlier they experience drinking, the higher the statistic goes, the higher the likelihood of that. Right, but I'm sure you knew that already. So just getting here into further information around this. This course is really going to differentiate between tolerance, a standard drink number, alcohol withdrawal versus intoxication, binge drinking, things like that, okay? And additionally, it will talk about how to advise patients about drinking, or clients about drinking alcohol. A big trademark of this particular course is that it really highlights the risk and protective factors for all individuals. It goes into a big, detailed, extensive area talking about alcohol and genetics, okay? So we know via research that genetic factors play a strong role in whether or not a person develops an alcohol use disorder, and it's usually accounting for 40 to 60% of the risk. Okay, all right. I understand for you as a therapist, there are some limitations. For example, if your client was experiencing withdrawal symptoms, that's not for you to handle. You absolutely would need to refer to a medical doctor, making sure that they're under the guidance of a medical doctor. And certainly you can support with the emotional and mental element of that, absolutely. What's nice about this course is it tells you a little bit about what happens medically within withdrawal, and thus what's happening in the brain during withdrawal. And you'll learn quite soon that engaging in any sort of depth therapy while someone is going through withdrawal is pretty non-existent. Okay. Yes, so you'll continue to learn about relapse and how to help with that. You're going to learn about how to identify the signs and symptoms of any CNS, central nervous system complications, and so forth. And this particular course, as I mentioned, is going to be very medically heavy. So you're going to learn about liver disease, and you're going to learn about liver transplantation and alcohol and Tylenol interaction, in addition to other vitamin deficiencies and chronic pancreatitis and things like that, okay? Okay, that's right. This is quite a lengthy one. It is coming in at 10 hours, as you know. So go ahead and just continue to browse that. We are highlighting in this course a correlation between bipolar disorder and alcohol use disorder, though, you know, causation is not always, they're not necessarily always related. Also noting here the relationship between cocaine and alcohol use. All right. One of the big pieces here is detecting alcohol use disorders. This is really helpful, especially when receiving new clients. Some clinicians choose to have this handout for every single intake, and this is really having a questionnaire around how frequently are they using alcohol, what happens when they're drinking, things like that. Okay, there is an example here for you for your convenience. All right, so let's see. Let's take a look now at our next very lengthy course, and this is going to conclude our consultation soon. Let me just let you know here some of the learning objectives of what to expect with regard to this course: the Demystifying Dissociation Principles, Best Practices, and Clinical Approaches. This is coming in at course number 76080 at a lengthy 10 hours. This was released in June of 2021 as well. So upon completion of this course, you should absolutely be able to define dissociation in a trauma-focused manner. Okay, we know that dissociation evolves from a trauma event or events or as a trauma response. Okay, you'll be able to describe the impact and manifestations of trauma and dissociation on the brain, because it certainly does impact it. You'll also be able to identify common myths about working with dissociative clients in psychotherapy, including the historical roots. So what this is really identifying is the history of what was known as multiple personality disorder. That's right. This is a very controversial diagnosis in this field. Some clinicians absolutely believe in all of it, have seen it, and utilize sort of the historical framework around it, while others start to challenge it, and others start to view it as a more comprehensive and not so narrow experience for individuals. It's certainly a very challenging diagnosis to work with. It's certainly one that you need to specialize in order to really get a handle on it. So you're also going to really get deeper into the criteria for dissociative disorders, because it's not just dissociative identity disorder. There are other disorders related to that. You're going to be able to describe the dissociative profile exercise. You'll have some screening tools and intervention. This is a wonderful strength to this course, is that you will walk away with so many tools to utilize in your practice. You're going to apply personal metaphor and parts work in the care of clients with dissociation. This means that you will be approaching or shifting your orientation towards the individual as conceptualizing them as made up of many parts, of we all are. The shadow, the wise one, the child, etc. We all have those elements within us, whether we have dissociative disorders or not. You're also going to be able to discuss key components of successful treatment, and you'll be able to implement approaches for early and later phases of these disorders. Okay, so let's just see here. So just like before, it's talking about the origins of these concepts. It even goes back to the word dissociation itself and how it's derived from a Latin root word. And one thing that's interesting about this particular course is that it really gets into the brain chemistry. For example, the R complex or reptilian brain includes the brainstem and cerebellum. Now, this part of the brain controls instinctual survival behaviors, muscle control, balance, breathing, and heartbeat. This part of the brain is most associated with the freeze response and dissociative experiences. So this reptilian brain is very reactive to direct stimuli. Okay, so if you've ever been in a very scary situation and you found yourself frozen in fear, we know that that was your reptilian brain doing its job, protecting you, trying to survive. Additionally, you'll learn about the limbic brain. This is the mammalian brain or heart brain. Now, this includes the oblongata, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and the nucleus accumbens. So this is also responsible for the dopamine release, okay? The limbic system is the source of emotions and instincts within the brain and responsible for the fight or flight response. So we know in the face of a traumatic event, the fight, flight, freeze, or appease response. The reptilian brain is responsible for the freeze response. The limbic brain is responsible for the fight or flight response. So everything in the limbic system is either agreeable, pleasure, or disagreeable, pain. Survival is based on the avoidance of pain and the reoccurrence of pleasure. And lastly, you're going to talk about the neocortex or the cerebral cortex. Now, this contains the frontal lobe. This frontal lobe we know is usually not fully developed until individuals are probably in their early to mid-20s, so it continues to grow even in teenagers and young adults. Now, this frontal lobe is unique to primates and some other highly evolved species like dolphins and orcas. This region of the brain regulates our executive functioning, which can include higher order thinking skills, reason, speech, sapience, meaning wisdom or calling upon a past experience. The limbic system must interact with this part of the brain in order to process emotions. Okay? So what you can see here is as we go through this course, we are really starting from the beginning and building upon the beginning, leading up to current time. This is really looking at what happens in the brain of a traumatized child, because we know that individuals that have these dissociative disorders absolutely experienced significant trauma in their childhood. So for children growing up in the high distress of a traumatic home, dissociation can become the brain's natural and preferred way to escape the pain. Okay? So cultural commentators and scholars have referred to dissociation as a gift to the traumatized child for this reason. So we'll also talk a little bit about addiction and how it's interrelated with this, okay? And additionally, with this, we're also debunking myths about dissociative identity disorder. We know that this was very sensationalized in the old film called Sybil. And then again in 2016 there was a film called Split, and this again was sensationalized and fictional in some ways. That is not how this disorder presents. It's an extreme exaggeration of how this disorder presents, and if you see someone presenting in that way, oftentimes it's a little bit exaggerated. All right. So moving forward now, that's right, we're talking about diagnostic perspectives on the concept of dissociation. We're really getting into the dissociative profile exercise, and you'll see on page 127, there is an example here for you where people can take a look at my dissociative tendencies and then what helps me to return to the present moment. So this is a tangible skill set or tangible tools that you can utilize with your clients moving forward. Okay. And it does give you some visual elements here that really help you to understand the primary structural dissociation, the secondary structural dissociation, and the tertiary structural dissociation as well. And it goes into the theories of that. Here we have an example of a metaphorical expressive art experience with someone who dissociates, called the car or the van. Okay? And this person is really identifying different elements of themselves. And so the way we get into to dissociative disorder is to really utilize metaphor. It's quite interesting, but this personal metaphor is really the avenue, the way through to differentiate the different parts of self, to identify and map their functioning and why they're here, and when that happens, sometimes they can be released. Okay? You'll also do some of your own mapping in this course as well. All right. So this does conclude our consultation together for these continuing education units. I'm curious what has stood out to you and any further questions. Okay, so you want all of them as you stated before. Okay, so let's take a look. So that was the alcohol use disorders, and finally the dissociative disorders as well. So luckily I have all of your personal information here. All I need to do before we hang up the phone is to complete the enrollment. Give me just a moment. I thank you so much for your patience. Okay. Okay, so that brings you in at a total of 31 hours for $59. That is going to go onto the credit card that you provided to me at the beginning of this phone call. If you have any questions or concerns or any issues receiving your certification, you have my direct line. I'd be quite happy to assist you with anything that might be challenging for you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm so glad that you enjoyed this service. We do our best to support all clinicians on their journey. Thank you so much, and I will hopefully see you in 2 years again.